There is a law that governs all manifestation. It is the law of beginnings. And under divine law, all beginnings start with a word. Before form appears, before money flows, before conditions rearrange, there must be a spoken seed. I have taught for many years that the spoken word is not a metaphor. It is not a suggestion. It is not symbolic. It is an instrument of spiritual jurisdiction. When you speak, you authorize. When you declare, you release. The law does not measure your emotions, it measures your decree. And the moment your word is uttered with certainty, the process of manifestation is engaged. This is why I begin with what I call the law of the spoken seed. For just as every harvest begins with a single seed buried in the soil, every visible result in your life begins with a word buried in the subconscious. Most people speak without knowing what they are planting. They talk about lack, delays, uncertainty. They describe what they do not want. They narrate what they fear. And then they wonder why their lives feel overgrown with weeds. The subconscious does not argue. It does not filter your intentions. It receives your word as command. And under this sacred machinery, it begins constructing reality accordingly. If you say, "I can't afford this," the subconscious begins to build the conditions that make that statement true. If you say, "Money never stays with me," it obeys. Not because it wishes you harm, but because it cannot distinguish between declarations made in jest, in panic, or in faith. It responds only to structure. Your word carries structure. It creates patterns of expectancy in the invisible. These patterns attract form. What you speak repeatedly becomes familiar to the law, and what becomes familiar is reinforced until it appears. You do not manifest what you want. You manifest what you consistently say. I once worked with a woman who said all the right affirmations in the morning. "God is my supply," she would say. "Money flows freely to me." But by afternoon, I would hear her say to her family, "We'll have to cut back this month. It's not in the budget. Let's just hope nothing unexpected happens." And so I asked her, "Do you realize you are canceling your morning decree by your afternoon vocabulary?" She had no idea that her casual language was undoing her conscious work. There is no such thing as idle speech under divine law. Every phrase carries creative weight. Even the words you say under your breath are recorded. The subconscious is always listening. It is always executing. You are either planting what you desire or reinforcing what you fear. This is why I do not teach people to repeat affirmations endlessly. Repetition without alignment is noise. The law is not moved by noise. It is moved by conviction. One word, spoken in authority, has more power than 100 muttered phrases of doubt. It is better to say one true thing and protect it than to say 1,000 things and contradict them all. To plant a spiritual seed is to speak once, clearly, legally, and then stand in agreement with what you have said. You do not revisit the soil and dig it up to check for roots. You do not add counter phrases under stress. You do not describe reality as if it is more real than your decree. What you have said must become final. That is how the seed takes root. When I say, "All that is mine by divine right now flows to me," I do not follow it with, "I hope this works." I do not watch for evidence to prove it true. The law does not require proof to begin its work. It requires structure. And structure is embedded in tone, word choice, and emotional certainty. Your spoken word must carry the signature of divine authority. This means you speak not as a beggar, but as one aligned with principle. You do not speak to convince the universe. You speak to command the subconscious. The law was designed to obey lawful speech. It was never designed to respond to fear. I cannot count the number of people who speak what they desire in prayer and then undo it through complaint. They pray for increase and then speak of limitation. They ask for guidance and then describe confusion. The law responds not to the prayer, but to the dominant vibration of the spoken word that follows. If you say, "I trust God," and then say, "Nothing ever works for me," the law will record and act upon the latter, because it is more energetically consistent. So I ask you now, what are you planting with your words? It is not enough to want prosperity. You must speak it. You must authorize it. You must use the legal language of faith. That is how the invisible begins to move. That is how spiritual supply begins to take shape. Not through effort, through order, not through noise, through speech that carries spiritual identity. Do not worry about how your supply will come. That is not your responsibility. Your responsibility is to plant the seed and to keep the soil undisturbed. This means you speak the word once, then stay out of contradiction. You do not rehearse your fears. You do not describe your limitations. You do not give voice to what you are trying to rise above. The moment you do, the soil of your mind becomes unstable. The subconscious receives a mixed instruction. It halts, it delays. Not because the law is confused, but because it has received a conflicting blueprint. You must be consistent in your speech if you desire consistency in your harvest. Here is what I recommend. Choose one sentence that declares your spiritual identity in the realm of provision. Write it down, speak it with reverence, and then say nothing that would reverse it. For example, all that is mine by divine right now locates me with ease. I do not chase, I do not doubt, I receive. Once spoken, that seed is active. You do not need to repeat it hourly. You do not need to convince yourself. You need only to refrain from planting weeds around it. Weeds come in the form of small phrases. What if it doesn't happen? I'll give it some time. This always happens to me. Each one is a counter-decree. Each one devalues the seed already in motion. Your speech is the atmosphere in which your harvest grows. If the atmosphere is hostile, your results will stall. If the atmosphere is confused, your results will become chaotic. But if your atmosphere is ordered, if your speech remains in alignment with law, then the process cannot fail. That is what I mean when I say, your word is your wand. It is not poetic. It is procedural. It is legal. Your word, spoken with spiritual precision, reshapes the invisible until it must give birth to new form. And so I leave you with this. Your reality tomorrow is the direct outcome of what you plant today. And planting does not begin with desire. It begins with speech. Speak the word. Let it settle. Do not disturb it. This is the law of the spoken seed. It does not skip steps. It does not bend to emotion. It obeys only one thing, the voice that speaks in alignment with divine right. In the next part, we will enter the unseen realm of gestation. The quiet space beneath the surface where all things begin to change, even when nothing looks different yet. But for now, remain still. Say only what matches your highest good, and let the seed rest. There is a phase in every demonstration that most people cannot endure. It is the silence, the pause, the season where nothing appears to be happening. They have spoken the word, they have planted the seed, and then they wait. And in the waiting, they panic. But what appears as inactivity is not delay. It is divine incubation. The seed must rest before it rises. The form must gather before it appears. The law must organize before it reveals. And this phase is governed by a principle just as real as any physical law, the law of silent progress. Silent does not mean inactive. It means concealed. It means sacred. It means you are no longer in control. And that is precisely the proof that the law has taken over. In the natural world, when a seed is placed in the soil, we do not demand to see it the next morning. We do not dig it up daily to check for evidence. We trust the process beneath the surface. And yet, when it comes to our finances, our relationships, our physical healing, we become restless. We think silence is failure. That assumption is spiritual immaturity. The subconscious never sleeps. Divine law never pauses. But it also does not announce its workings. It forms in shadows, it aligns in silence. And those who cannot honor that silence disrupt their own results. I have seen many speak the right words and then forfeit the harvest because they could not endure the invisible stretch. They wanted proof too soon. They demanded a sign. They interpreted delay as denial. And so in their fear, they spoke again, not in faith, but in doubt. They said things like, maybe I was wrong, maybe this isn't working, maybe I need to try something else. Each one of those phrases is a spiritual contradiction. And contradiction is the enemy of formation. Just as in the early stages of pregnancy, no one can see the child, and yet life has already begun. So too in the realm of wealth and manifestation. The moment you speak from alignment, formation begins. It begins without evidence. It begins without audience. It begins without applause. And it is precisely in that invisibility that your discipline is revealed. The law of silent progress teaches us that spiritual development cannot be monitored by physical senses. You cannot track it with your eyes. You cannot measure it with logic. You must trust the process that lies beneath your comprehension. When you declare your wealth, when you speak your alignment, when you issue a command under divine right, the machinery of form begins to move. It may not move in your sight, it may not move in your timing, but it is already at work, rearranging circumstances, redirecting flows, preparing you to receive what you claimed. But if you interrupt this phase with worry, you return to the beginning. You uproot the instruction, you collapse the alignment, because now the law must obey your most recent word. And if that word was spoken from fear, it cancels what was planted in faith. This is why I teach people not only to speak, but to remain silent after the speech. Silence is not passive. It is protective. It guards the spiritual formation underway. It preserves the decree. It keeps the soil of your mind undisturbed. I once counseled a man who had spoken wealth into form. He had declared his supply. He had aligned with his right work. But within days he began pacing. He said to me, "Florence, nothing's changing." And I asked him, "What are you expecting to see?" He said, "A phone call, an opportunity, a deposit, something." And I told him, "You are watching for confirmation with natural eyes. But spiritual results are not born through external triggers. They are born through internal continuity. And your restlessness is a form of spiritual contradiction." He had not protected the silence. He had filled the sacred interval with suspicion, and the harvest withdrew. The law does not punish, but it does wait for purity. It waits for consistency. And when your speech is aligned, but your silence is not, the signal becomes fragmented. The progress continues in fits and starts until your atmosphere becomes stable. That is the purpose of this second law. It teaches you to leave the field alone after you have sown. It teaches you to honor the unseen. It teaches you to hold still in your vibration, to remain composed in your identity, even when the world appears unchanged. Do not look at your bank account for proof of what you've spoken. That is backward. You are not watching reality. You are creating it. And creation requires a holding pattern. In every spiritual demonstration, there is a corridor between declaration and fulfillment. In that corridor, you will be tempted. Tempted to speak against yourself, tempted to rush, tempted to doubt. But if you understand the law of silent progress, you will remain anchored. You will say, "The law is now working through the invisible. I need not assist, I need not advise, I need not agitate." That is spiritual maturity. The ability to remain still while your good is being assembled. It is during this silent phase that you must become vigilant. Vigilant not in action, but in containment. You must protect your vibration. You must not explain yourself. You must not consult others for reassurance. You must not revisit what you've already settled. Every time you re-speak a command out of anxiety, you declare that the first command was insufficient. That is a form of spiritual doubt. And doubt, once spoken, becomes a new seed. This does not mean you never affirm again, but it does mean that affirmation must never become a disguise for fear. You must know the difference between declaring in alignment and repeating in panic. The former builds, the latter breaks. I often advise students to avoid talking about their demonstration while it is in progress. Do not speak of it. Do not share it. Do not seek sympathy for what is not yet here. Instead, say nothing. Hold your posture. Trust the incubation. Let your words take shape in silence. This is not avoidance, it is authority. Those who know they have planted well do not speak of it every hour. They go about their business. They bless the process. They smile at the unseen, and they let the soil do what it was designed to do: nurture, protect, and birth. You must become comfortable with not seeing. That is what faith demands. You must learn to walk through the invisible with the same confidence you had when you spoke the command. That is what law responds to. Not neediness, not nervousness, but spiritual congruence. The seed of wealth is not activated by worry. It is activated by spiritual stillness. And the longer you can hold that stillness, the more efficiently the law can operate. So what do you do during this phase? You bless. You stay calm. You remain loyal to the word you already spoke. You do not inject new phrases. You do not explain the silence. You do not call friends for encouragement. You simply stay still and watch nothing become something. This is not poetic. It is procedural, and it is how invisible wealth begins to gather mass and form. In this way, silence becomes your proof. Not the lack of activity, but the presence of alignment. If you can be quiet, you are qualified. If you can be still, you are aligned. If you can say nothing while the law builds on your behalf, you are no longer a student. You are a participant. The law of silent progress is often missed because people want movement they can see. But divine law does not need your validation. It needs your obedience. Speak once. Remain still. Watch for the harvest only after you have proven you can endure the field. Let the unseen do its work. If a man speaks a word and does not see results, he often assumes the law is ignoring him. But the law does not forget. The law does not sleep. The law does not dismiss or delay out of whim. The moment a word is spoken with authority, something begins to form. Always. But what most people miss is this: the formation does not begin in matter. It begins in pattern, in structure, in vibration. In the silent architecture of spiritual law, every word spoken in faith initiates a pattern the universe must honor. This is the law of word to form, and without understanding it, you will continue to speak what you mean, yet receive what you fear. You see, your word is not simply an expression of desire. It is the instruction that molds the invisible into the visible. What is spoken sets the mold. The mold determines the shape. And once the shape is fixed, matter must fill it. This is not philosophy. This is spiritual mechanics. When I say, God is my instant and endless supply, I am not making a hopeful claim. I am establishing a mold. That mold may not appear in physical form at once, but in the realm of spiritual causation, the blueprint is drawn immediately. From that moment, conditions begin to respond, environments shift, people are positioned. Not because I am striving, but because the mold is in place, and the law is obligated to pour into it. But here lies the danger. If I later say, I'm not sure this will work, or maybe I was being unrealistic, I do not simply express doubt, I alter the mold. The shape begins to collapse, and the law, having no fixed structure to obey, suspends the outpouring. You cannot receive into a shifting mold. You cannot birth form from contradiction. That is why I do not allow casual speech in spiritual practice. Casual speech is not harmless, it is costly. Every phrase, every murmur, every just-in-case contingency that crosses your lips is registered. And the law, exact and impartial, begins forming accordingly. People often ask me why they do not see consistent demonstration. And I tell them, because they do not hold the mold long enough for matter to meet it. They speak a word, form a shape, then interrupt it with a new opinion. Maybe I need to be more practical. Maybe I asked for too much. Maybe I should lower my expectations. Each of these thoughts is a hammer brought down on a sacred design. Let me be clear. The law does not punish, it reflects. If your speech wavers, your form wavers. If your tone is mixed, your results are mixed. If your belief contradicts your decree, the contradiction becomes the mold. This is not meant to frighten you. It is meant to awaken you. You are not helpless. You are not a bystander in the shaping of your life. You are the architect, and your blueprint is drawn by the rhythm and consistency of your spoken word. This is why I teach spiritual law, not as encouragement, but as instruction. Encouragement is temporary. Law is eternal. And the law of word to form is as real as the law of gravity. It cannot be bypassed. It cannot be softened. It cannot be cheated. It can only be obeyed or broken. When the word is spoken with clarity, backed by conviction, and held without contradiction, the form is inevitable. It must appear. It is not optional. It is not speculative. It is guaranteed, because the mold is complete, and the law does not fail to fill it. I remember once advising a man in deep financial distress. He had declared freedom, declared supply, declared peace, and yet his life remained chaotic. I asked him to recount his conversations throughout the day. He confessed to saying things like, "Money's tight. I hope this doesn't backfire. Let's be realistic." These were not affirmations. They were mold breakers. He had declared wealth, but continued to reinforce poverty. He spoke peace in the morning and rehearsed panic by evening. And the law, bound by exact correspondence, mirrored the inconsistency. So I taught him how to hold the mold. To say the word once, say it clearly, and refuse to contradict it with any later speech. Within 3 weeks, supply began to flow, not through magic, not through chance, but through the simple restoration of spiritual pattern. If you want to understand how word becomes form, you must understand this. The subconscious receives the shape, and the law fills it. The subconscious is your silent servant. It does not ask what you meant. It accepts what you repeat. And repetition is not just frequency, it is vibration. If your tone carries fear, even your affirmations will translate as alarm. But if your tone carries authority, even a whisper becomes a decree. You must therefore become fluent in the language of alignment. This means speaking only what you are willing to see, declaring only what you are willing to host, and maintaining the mold long enough for the law to complete its work. This takes discipline, and this is where most fail. They ask, "How long must I speak before it appears?" And I answer, you do not speak to make it appear. You speak because it is law. It appears because you did not stop. The form does not respond to desire. It responds to decree. And decree is not begging. It is stating, declaring, releasing, holding, without panic, without spectacle, without begging God to intervene. God has already provided the mechanism. You need only use it properly. So how do you practice the law of word to form? First, you clarify what you want, not in vague wishes, but in spiritual identity. You ask, what am I ready to hold? And when you know it, you speak it. Once. Then you protect the mold. No contradicting phrases. No dramatic complaints. No rehashing of old narratives. You do not need to say it again. You need to agree with it silently until it is complete. And when the form appears, you do not act surprised. You receive it like a citizen, not like a beggar. You receive it as one who held the pattern, and now welcomes its fulfillment. You must stop worshiping the form and start honoring the law that governs it. The form is not your source. The form is not your identity. It is only the echo of the word you once spoke and did not revoke. That is the law of word to form. Let others chase results. Let others try harder. You will speak once and stand. You will build the mold with your word and let the law do the rest. In our next lesson, we will confront the most crucial turn in your spiritual wealth: identity. What happens when your inner name does not match the good you have called in? And how can you speak not as one requesting wealth, but as one who already is it? Until then, I ask you this: what mold have you been forming? And are you willing to hold it long enough to see it filled? Let that be your meditation and your alignment. There is a moment in every spiritual demonstration where the law must decide, whose command do I obey, the outer word or the inner identity? And in that moment, the subconscious does not choose what you want. It chooses what you are. It does not shape reality by your best declarations, but by the self you have most consistently claimed. This is the law of the claimed self, and it governs every result in your life, because it governs the speaker behind the speech. You may affirm wealth 100 times a day. You may write sentences of power in your journal. You may declare, "I am rich," or "money flows to me," or "God is my supply." But if the vibration beneath those sentences is still one of fear, of unworthiness, of inferiority, then those words are not commands. They are requests. And the law does not respond to requests. It responds to position. The position of the speaker determines the power of the command. To say, "I am prosperous," while inwardly holding the self-concept of a struggler is not alignment. It's contradiction. And the law, always consistent, will obey the deeper of the two. Not the louder, not the more poetic, but the more established. If your inner identity says, "I am the one who has to fight for every dollar," then no matter how often you affirm abundance, your speech is overruled by your being. The word is planted, but the soil is hostile. It cannot take root where it is not believed. People often misunderstand what "I am" means. They think it is a phrase to be repeated. But "I am" is not a mantra. It is a signature. It is the name under which all your spiritual transactions are made. It is your energetic authority. And every time you speak after those words, you file a legal document in the subconscious mind. I am always behind. I am trying to get ahead. I am tired of starting over. Each of these sentences is a signed confession, and each one is obeyed, not because the law is cruel, but because it is accurate. The law must fulfill what you have claimed. So I ask you now, quietly but clearly, who have you been saying you are? Not in your affirmations, but in your reactions, in your internal conversations, in the way you describe your place in the world. Do you speak as one who is already appointed, or one still waiting to be chosen? Do you speak as one whose inheritance is guaranteed, or one still hoping for permission? Do you speak as a vessel of divine right, or as a victim of circumstance? The answer to these questions will tell you not where you are, but who you are. And who you are, in the eyes of spiritual law, is what you say you are. The law of the claimed self teaches us that identity is not a private matter. It is not locked in thought. It is not buried in your past. It is revealed, always, through speech. The words you say about yourself form the container into which every other law must pour. That is why when I teach prosperity, I do not begin with money. I begin with the speaker, because if the speaker does not identify as the one who is qualified, permitted, and capable of hosting wealth, no affirmation will stick. No form will remain. You cannot receive in contradiction. A woman once came to me saying she had tried every technique, read every book, spoken every affirmation, but her finances were still unstable. When I asked her what she says when she thinks no one is listening, she said, "I usually whisper to myself, nothing ever lasts. I always mess things up." That was it. Her outer word said prosperity. Her inner confession said instability. And the law, loyal to her most repeated claim, obeyed her identity. I instructed her to write a single sentence. I am the one through whom divine supply flows without interruption. And I told her not to just say it, but to become it. To correct herself every time a contrary identity arose. To reject the lie not with emotion, but with structure. To build a new name for herself in the realm of law. This is the key to sustained transformation. Not repetition of sentences, but renovation of self. When you say, "I am a receiver of divine wealth," you must say it as one who is already assigned the role. You must not hope it's true. You must not say it to feel better. You must say it as fact and stand as its embodiment. Identity does not shift by chance. It shifts by agreement. If you keep describing yourself as someone who is working on it, trying to believe, getting closer, you are postponing the fulfillment. You are adding a delay between your speech and your reception. You do not need to try harder. You need to claim deeper. So how do you do this? You listen. You listen to the way you introduce yourself to life. You observe the phrases you use when money is discussed. You take note of the tone in your voice when you speak about your future. And where you find conflict, you correct it, not with guilt, but with new design. You say instead, I am spiritually qualified. I am the wealth of God in motion. I am the rightful heir of all that is good. I am no longer asking, I am standing. These are not declarations for the universe. These are instructions to your subconscious. And the moment your subconscious accepts the new identity, the law rushes to obey it. For it is not your effort that magnetizes form. It is your self-definition. You are not manifesting wealth, you are manifesting yourself, in visible terms. And when the self you claim is aligned with abundance, the abundance must appear, because it has no legal reason to stay away. In the next part, we will explore how receiving happens, not by deserving, not by grasping, but by relaxing into the sacred stillness that proves your readiness. But before that, I ask you to perform this quiet audit. What name have I been answering to? And what new name must I begin to claim, so that the law may recognize me rightly? That question is not rhetorical, it is spiritual strategy, and you must answer it aloud. The most overlooked step in demonstration is not the word you speak, nor the belief you claim. It is what you do after both have been spoken. This is the part no one teaches, because it does not look like effort. It is not glamorous, it does not make for stories. But it is, without question, the spiritual hinge upon which all manifestation turns. And that is the law of sacred stillness. By now, you understand that words are seeds. You understand that belief is structure. You understand that identity is the route through which the law draws its instructions. But if you have planted the right seed, aligned your identity, and spoken your command, and still you cannot be still, then the demonstration will stall. Not because the law has failed, but because you have not yet stepped out of the way. Stillness is not inactivity. It is the highest form of spiritual authority. When you are still, you are no longer negotiating with the invisible. You are no longer seeking reassurance. You are no longer offering emotional payment in exchange for proof. You are declaring, without sound, that what you have spoken is done, and that nothing more needs to be added to make it real. I have said before, faith knows it has already received and acts accordingly. But most students confuse action with motion. They think they must do something to prove they believe. But belief that requires evidence is not belief. It is doubt rehearsed in spiritual language. True belief rests. It holds its posture. It resists the urge to fix what has already been completed by law. There is a reason the law does not respond to panic. Panic adds nothing to the process. It disturbs the soil. It clutters the signal. It reintroduces the very chaos you claim to be rising above. That is why many speak their good and cancel it within hours, not because they do not want it, but because they cannot stop themselves from meddling in its delivery. You cannot demonstrate wealth while vibrating in anxiety. You cannot declare completion and then act as if you are waiting to be rescued. The law records not only your words, but your atmosphere. And your atmosphere is clearest in your stillness, or your refusal to practice it. A man once came to me frustrated. He had spoken his desire clearly. He had aligned his thoughts. He had removed contradictory words. And yet, he could not rest. He said, I can't stop checking. I check my bank account. I refresh my emails. I analyze every delay. It's like something in me won't shut off. And I said to him, that something is not your intuition. It is your fear disguised as control. And as long as you try to manage the demonstration with your nervous system, you are blocking the very thing you claim to believe in. What he lacked was not language. What he lacked was spiritual stillness. Stillness is not about waiting quietly. It is about refusing to interfere. It is about knowing that once the spiritual instruction has been given, the only thing that remains is to not disrupt its unfolding. The subconscious mind, once instructed clearly, does not require reminders. It does not need you to supervise its work. It operates on blueprint, not on volume. And once the blueprint is stable, it begins forming the experience in silence. Not through thunder, not through spectacle, but through quiet, exact, divine orchestration. When you are still, you declare that the process is trustworthy. You say with your energy, I have nothing more to add. I have nothing to defend. I am no longer the speaker. I am now the one who holds space for what I've spoken to arrive. This is a holy place. Few enter it. Even fewer remain. Most students want to speak. They want to correct. They want to perform spiritual acrobatics. They want to prove they believe. But belief that demands display is not belief. It is insecurity masquerading as faith. To obey the law of sacred stillness is to do nothing, not from laziness, but from knowing. It is to act only when moved by divine impulse, not by nervous anticipation. It is to remove the clutter of trying and allow space for the form to emerge. Stillness is not absence. It is agreement. It is the full-bodied alignment with what has already been spoken. It is the field into which manifestation descends. And if the field is noisy, the seed remains suspended. You must learn to sit with the quiet where no feedback is given, the quiet where no sign appears, the quiet where everything looks unchanged, but where everything is shifting beneath the surface. If you cannot sit there, you are not yet ready to receive, because receiving is not a grabbing motion, it is a posture, and that posture is stillness. Stillness says, I do not need to manage the divine. Stillness says, I trust the container I built. Stillness says, it is no longer my move. This is not passivity, it is reverence. And reverence is the missing ingredient in most spiritual practice. The student wants speed, the law offers structure, the student wants sensation, the law offers sequence, the student wants reassurance, the law offers silence, and those who cannot honor silence will never hold the fullness of what they seek. I remember once receiving a blessing I had spoken for many months. It arrived not when I shouted, not when I demanded, but when I gave up the impulse to interfere. When I became quiet, not out of exhaustion, but out of completion. I had nothing more to say. I had said it all. And then I waited, not passively, but reverently. Within days, what I had spoken years prior came into form. Why? Because stillness is not delay. Stillness is preparation by surrender. If you cannot be still, you are declaring that the law is incomplete, that your word is insufficient, that your faith needs help. But when you become still, you say, it is done, and I will not rush what is already on the way. This law is not for beginners. It is for the spiritually mature, those who know the difference between silence and stagnation, between waiting and worrying, between doing and believing. If you truly understand the laws we have studied so far, this one is inevitable. You will not want to interfere. You will want to protect what you've spoken, and the highest form of protection is stillness. So I ask you now, can you remain still while heaven organizes what you cannot see? Can you stay composed while the form is shaping beyond your vision? Can you refrain from checking, from doubting, from interrupting? If so, the manifestation must come, because there is now room for it to land. This is the law of sacred stillness. It is the quiet seal that tells the law, this instruction is final. And once the law hears that silence, it begins moving with full force, because there is no more contradiction. There is only readiness. In the final part, we will study the most important decree of all, the decree that not only opens the gates of provision, but keeps them open. The decree that frees your good to stay, multiply, and serve others. And that is the law of permanent permission. But before we arrive there, you must master this one. Say your word, then say no more. Let stillness prove what panic never could. The most overlooked step in demonstration is not the word you speak, nor the belief you claim. It is what you do after both have been spoken. This is the part no one teaches, because it does not look like effort. It is not glamorous, it does not make for stories. But it is, without question, the spiritual hinge upon which all manifestation turns. And that is the law of sacred stillness. By now you understand that words are seeds. You understand that belief is structure. You understand that identity is the root through which the law draws its instructions. But if you have planted the right seed, aligned your identity, and spoken your command, and still you cannot be still, then the demonstration will stall. Not because the law has failed, but because you have not yet stepped out of the way. Stillness is not inactivity. It is the highest form of spiritual authority. When you are still, you are no longer negotiating with the invisible. You are no longer seeking reassurance. You are no longer offering emotional payment in exchange for proof. You are declaring without sound that what you have spoken is done, and that nothing more needs to be added to make it real. I have said before, faith knows it has already received and acts accordingly. But most students confuse action with motion. They think they must do something to prove they believe. But belief that requires evidence is not belief. It is doubt rehearsed in spiritual language. True belief rests. It holds its posture. It resists the urge to fix what has already been completed by law. There is a reason the law does not respond to panic. Panic adds nothing to the process. It disturbs the soil. It clutters the signal. It reintroduces the very chaos you claim to be rising above. That is why many speak their good and cancel it within hours. Not because they do not want it, but because they cannot stop themselves from meddling in its delivery. You cannot demonstrate wealth while vibrating in anxiety. You cannot declare completion and then act as if you are waiting to be rescued. The law records not only your words, but your atmosphere. And your atmosphere is clearest in your stillness, or your refusal to practice it. A man once came to me frustrated. He had spoken his desire clearly. He had aligned his thoughts. He had removed contradictory words, and yet he could not rest. He said, "I can't stop checking. I check my bank account. I refresh my emails. I analyze every delay. It's like something in me won't shut off." And I said to him, "That something is not your intuition. It is your fear disguised as control. And as long as you try to manage the demonstration with your nervous system, you are blocking the very thing you claimed to believe in." What he lacked was not language. What he lacked was spiritual stillness. Stillness is not about waiting quietly. It is about refusing to interfere. It is about knowing that once the spiritual instruction has been given, the only thing that remains is to not disrupt its unfolding. The subconscious mind, once instructed clearly, does not require reminders. It does not need you to supervise its work. It operates on blueprint, not on volume. And once the blueprint is stable, it begins forming the experience in silence. Not through thunder, not through spectacle, but through quiet, exact, divine orchestration. When you are still, you declare that the process is trustworthy. You say with your energy, "I have nothing more to add. I have nothing to defend. I am no longer the speaker. I am now the one who holds space for what I've spoken to arrive." This is a holy place. Few enter it. Even fewer remain. Most students want to speak. They want to correct. They want to perform spiritual acrobatics. They want to prove they believe. But belief that demands display is not belief. It is insecurity masquerading as faith. To obey the law of sacred stillness is to do nothing, not from laziness, but from knowing. It is to act only when moved by divine impulse, not by nervous anticipation. It is to remove the clutter of trying and allow space for the form to emerge. Stillness is not absence. It is agreement. It is the full-bodied alignment with what has already been spoken. It is the field into which manifestation descends. And if the field is noisy, the seed remains suspended. You must learn to sit with the quiet where no feedback is given, the quiet where no sign appears, the quiet where everything looks unchanged, but where everything is shifting beneath the surface. If you cannot sit there, you are not yet ready to receive. Because receiving is not a grabbing motion, it is a posture. And that posture is stillness. Stillness says, I do not need to manage the divine. Stillness says, I trust the container I built. Stillness says, it is no longer my move. This is not passivity, it is reverence. And reverence is the missing ingredient in most spiritual practice. The student wants speed, the law offers structure, the student wants sensation. The law offers sequence. The student wants reassurance. The law offers silence. And those who cannot honor silence will never hold the fullness of what they seek. I remember once receiving a blessing I had spoken for many months. It arrived not when I shouted, not when I demanded, but when I gave up the impulse to interfere. When I became quiet, not out of exhaustion, but out of completion. I had nothing more to say. I had said it all. And then I waited, not passively, but reverently. Within days, what I had spoken years prior came into form. Why? Because stillness is not delay. Stillness is preparation by surrender. If you cannot be still, you are declaring that the law is incomplete, that your word is insufficient, that your faith needs help. But when you become still, you say, it is done, and I will not rush what is already on the way. This law is not for beginners. It is for the spiritually mature. Those who know the difference between silence and stagnation, between waiting and worrying, between doing and believing. If you truly understand the laws we have studied so far, this one is inevitable. You will not want to interfere. You will want to protect what you've spoken. And the highest form of protection is stillness. So I ask you now, can you remain still while heaven organizes what you cannot see? Can you stay composed while the form is shaping beyond your vision? Can you refrain from checking, from doubting, from interrupting? If so, the manifestation must come, because there is now room for it to land. This is the law of sacred stillness. It is the quiet seal that tells the law, this instruction is final. And once the law hears that silence, it begins moving with full force. Because there is no more contradiction. There is only readiness. In the final part, we will study the most important decree of all, the decree that not only opens the gates of provision, but keeps them open. The decree that frees your good to stay, multiply, and serve others. And that is the law of permanent permission. But before we arrive there, you must master this one. Say your word, then say no more. Let stillness prove what panic never could. There is a point in spiritual demonstration where the question is no longer, can I receive, but can I allow this to remain? It is one thing to receive good. It is another to let it stay, to permit it to become your new normal without suspicion, guilt, or internal sabotage. This distinction defines the final law in the sequence, the law of permanent permission. This law governs retention. It answers the question, why does good come and then vanish? Why do breakthroughs collapse back into struggle? Why do sudden increases result in old patterns of fear? The answer is this: what is not given legal permission to stay will return to the realm from which it came. Most students of spiritual law focus on calling things in. They learn to speak, to believe, to align, to mold, to wait, to claim. But they overlook a critical step: allowing themselves to legally host what they have requested. If that permission is not established at the level of identity, the law cannot hold the result in place. Form requires legal residence, not just temporary welcome. Many speak words of wealth, but inwardly still identify as someone who must struggle to earn. Others receive an opportunity and immediately brace for disappointment. Some attract abundance only to spend it recklessly or find a way to lose it. These are not failures of method. They are failures of permission. You cannot host what you do not believe you are allowed to keep. The law does not impose. It only fills the space you prepare. If your subconscious blueprint says, I'm not worthy, or it's not safe to have this much, or this won't last, then that blueprint becomes the final instruction. The form recedes, the condition returns, the supply dries up, not because the law withheld it, but because you did not approve its stay. There is a difference between speaking a thing and integrating it. Permanent permission means the self has become legally capable of holding the result without contradiction. It means there is no inner voice preparing for reversal, no hidden clause saying, just in case this fails, I'll soften the fall. No protective mechanism waiting to restore the old familiar struggle. Only a stable posture. This is mine by divine right, and I do not need to question its place. To give permanent permission is not to declare once and forget. It is to withdraw all counter-authorities. It is to revoke old agreements with suffering, to cancel unconscious contracts with loss, to dissolve the inner case built against yourself. And this can only be done by taking full authorship of what arrives, without apology, without reduction, without shame. If you say, I am ready for wealth, but internally still feel like an imposter, then no matter how many affirmations you speak, the law receives mixed instruction. It will bring you partial form or fluctuating outcomes, not out of cruelty, but out of precision. The law mirrors not your excitement, but your permissions. When a person finally grants themselves full spiritual authority to retain what they've declared, a shift occurs. They stop bracing. They stop justifying. They stop managing optics. They stop explaining why they have what they have. And instead, they begin operating from peace. Peace that does not perform. Peace that does not question whether the blessing will stay. Peace that does not prepare for reversal. That peace is a legal signal. It tells the law, this structure can now hold this form. Permission is not a feeling. It is a stance. It is a decision that says, I no longer identify with the previous version of my life. I have issued a new order, and I now live under it. You cannot fear loss and stabilize gain. You cannot resent success and maintain it. You cannot grieve your past while expecting your future to honor you. You must be willing to live inside the good you've requested, as if it were natural, expected, authorized. To practice the law of permanent permission is to speak as one who is no longer applying for approval. You do not explain your prosperity. You do not perform your gratitude. You do not shrink your light to ease the discomfort of those who still resist their own. You live quietly, lawfully, fully, within the new atmosphere you yourself have designed. This is the final law because it confirms whether the others have truly been accepted. If you still need to earn it, or prove it, or justify it, then you have not yet stepped into full jurisdiction. The law is impartial, but it will never impose. It waits to be confirmed by your tone, your posture, and your quiet refusal to return to what was. So I ask you now, have you permitted your good to stay? Not for a day, not for a season, but permanently? Have you stopped preparing for its disappearance? Have you stopped referring to it as unexpected? Have you ceased narrating yourself as someone who doesn't usually get this lucky? If not, the law is waiting, not for better behavior, but for higher authorization. The final alignment is not about summoning, it is about sustaining, and sustainability is a matter of permission. When you finally grant that permission, not with words but with identity, the law no longer has to rebuild your blessing over and over. It anchors it, it multiplies it, it protects it, because it has been told to stay. This is the law of permanent permission. It is the law that makes your good not only visible, but durable. And once invoked, you will not have to manifest over and over again, because the demonstration will no longer be an exception, it will be your structure. Everything that has been said across these 7 laws leads to a single reality. Spiritual wealth is not a mystery, and it is not a gift reserved for the few. It is a system, lawful, repeatable, exact. It does not answer need, it answers structure. It is not moved by your past, your pain, or your passion. It is moved by your legal identity, by the word you have spoken, and by your refusal to contradict it. You do not receive by effort. You receive by jurisdiction. You do not wait for timing, you become the timing. You do not manifest from desire, you manifest from position. Every law given here was designed to restore the original spiritual order, that your life must reflect your word, not your wounds, your permission, not your pressure, your identity, not your history. The law does not forget, it does not discriminate, it does not get tired. It waits for you to speak and to stop speaking, to decide and to remain decided, to open and to hold the opening without collapsing it under contradiction. From this moment forward, your wealth will not come from chance or timing or worthiness. It will come because it was legally summoned, faithfully held, and permanently permitted. And nothing, not condition, not memory, not fear, will have the right to override that decree unless you invite it back. Let every law you have learned here not remain as theory, but be translated into atmosphere. Let your word not only begin the process, but become the law by which your entire house is governed. The demonstration does not need to begin again. The law has already heard you. Now, let it obey you.